We are continuing on the top 10, Brachot, daf 59. We're going to be doing 7, 8, 9, and hopefully 10 from Brachot, daf 59. Number 7 is about the blessing for the new sun. Now, there is a blessing for the new moon. Every month, the moon wanes, and then it becomes a crescent moon, a new moon, we call it, and then it waxes again. And Rosh Chodesh is basically connected to the beginning of the new moon, even though sometimes it doesn't have to be the exact same moment of appearance of the moon, the molad as it's called, and the actual day of Rosh Chodesh, but it's approximately the same time. And the sun doesn't really, there is no such thing as a new sun in a physical sense. The sun doesn't wax or wane, but yet there's this concept where the Gemara on the top of the New Testament base says, Tana Rabbanan, Haro Hachama b'tkufasa, Levanim b'gbarasab kochavim b'mesilatam, mazalot k'tidran, Omer Baruch Osa Bereshis. The rabbis taught if you see the sun in the beginning of its cycle, the moon and its strength, and the planets in their orbits, and the zodiac in their order, you say the blessing, Birchat Hachama, Olam Osei Maaseh Bereshis. He who makes create the work or the wonder, the work of creation. And when is this? So here's where it gets interesting. Our standard Talmudic text has a quote from Abaya that says, every 28 years, there begins a new cycle, a new solar cycle. And the Nisan equinox falls in the hour of Saturn on the evening of Tuesday, which is the night before Wednesday. So, to be honest with you, I'm not going to get into the kind of details of what exactly that means, but I'll just tell you that there is a blessing. I've made it 2 times in my life so far. Looking forward to making the 3rd, maybe even a 4th time. But what it is every 28 years, we say that the sun is in its original place when it was created. Now, what's interesting about this conversation is it seems to be problematic with a ongoing debate in the tractate Rosh Hashanah between Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Yoshua of when was the world created? Was it created in Nisan or in Tishrei? Now, on the one hand, it would seem that the resolution is found in the liturgy for Rosh Hashanah, which seems to indicate that we believe that Rosh Hashanah, which is in Tishrei, is the beginning. It's commemorating the beginning of creation. Question then becomes, why would you then make a bracha on saying that the beginning of creation, essentially the 4th day of creation, right? That's when the Ma'orot, when the sun and the moon were created, would be in the time of Nisan. So it seems not consistent. So that's a very strong question. So not many people, but a number of people have asked it, come up with different answers. That's one question. The second question on this is that there is another girsa, there is another rendition, and it doesn't have this whole thing about the Tkufas Nisan. It's not really about a 28-year period. They don't have that whole statement of Abaya. It's just basically when you see the sun in its strength, meaning when the sun is really strong. So, question then would become, if there's 2 different readings of the text, why are we so eager to paskin like one of the readings and A, and B, a reading that contradicts the liturgy of Rosh Hashanah, as I was stated? So those are 2 questions. And the answer could be found in this concept that Tosfos and other commentaries talk about in Gemara Rosh Hashanah, that it could be that both are right, both Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Shua are right. The world was created in Nisan and in Tishrei. So, for example, it could be that in potential it was created in Nisan, let's say, and then in actuality it was created in Tishrei. So, what is the potential versus the actuality? It could mean one of many things. It could mean the things that would set the world into what would eventually be the creation of Adam and Eve would happen in Nisan, and the actual Adam and Eve and the history as we know it from there would be created in Tishrei. Now, how do you measure the 6 months of Nisan to Tishrei? So that's another interesting question. There's either it's not yet time, it's called Seder Zman, and the order of time, free time, or it's some type of Kabbalistic time. And there are ways of reconciling the age of the universe with the biblical account of the universe based on Kabbalistic texts that could come out to the same age that scientists are saying the age of the universe is, based on this concept of the world, these worlds that preceded our world. It doesn't necessarily mean that they preceded our world in another place, in another place in the physical world or in the spiritual world. It could mean that, but it could also mean that it's earlier stages of our existence that we can't yet call creation the way we would be able to describe the stories of Adam and Eve and so on and so forth. So perhaps that's what the Gemara is alluding to by not taking a stand or taking both sides, saying both sides are right, is that the creation story is much more complex. And this is really an allusion to the Gemara in other tractates that deal with the idea of Ma'aseh Merkava, Ma'aseh Bereshis, that there is a secret of creation. What we read about in Genesis is the external element of it, but it's up to the Kabbalists and the Torah scholars to understand it in a deeper way, and within a limited capacity, reveal some elements of that secret. So that could be a little bit about that. And that could also be interesting of why we don't even bother just saying, make a blessing for the sun and its strength. A, what does that even mean? And B, perhaps we don't want to make a blessing for the sun every day, so we reserve it to make it once a year, once every 28 years. Okay. That is number 7. That's Birchat Hachama. Now we're going on to number 8. There are 2 blessings we make when something good happens. One is a shechianu. Shechianu is when we a blessing we make when we buy a new suit, when we buy a new house, when we buy a talit. What about when you have a baby? What about when you buy a new shirt? What about when you buy a used car? What about when you million other things? So we're going to be talking about Shechianu a little bit more in number 10, as well as probably number 1 and maybe number 2 of Daf 60. So let's start out. Let's begin to answer some of these questions. Now, before we get into when you make a shechianu, let's just say that, let's take an example of an inheritance. Somebody dies and leaves Yitzchak dies and leaves Yaakov an inheritance. If Yaakov's the only child, well, they would make a Dayana Emes on the death of Yitzchak. But when they find out that they actually got an inheritance, they'd make another bracha on a shechianu, on the new wealth that they've acquired as an inheritance. What if there are 2 people or more than 2 people inheriting the money that Yitzchak left behind? So let's say Yaakov has a brother named Esav. So then Yaakov and Esav wouldn't make a shechianu. They'd make Brachot Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam hatov v'hameitiv. God is good, and he causes others, good for others as well. It's a share of good. So that would be one example. Another example would be if a couple had a baby boy. We could talk about girl, but a boy, where girls were a little bit more complicated because people were in that time and place, people felt it was really hard to have a girl. But for a boy, they would make Hatova Hametiv, because both the mother and the father were happy about that, and they would make that blessing Hatova Hametiv. Now, so those are examples of what you would make Hatova Hametiv for. Now let's go a little bit more into this idea of Shechianu versus Hatova Hametiv. There is some conversation about rain that rains, let's say you have a field, you would make Hatova Hametiv, that rather than the Shechianu when it rains, because it's not just good for this particular owner, it's good for all the other people who own other fields. So the Gemara asks a question, is that true? Only one who owns land would recite Hatova Hametiv, but there's a Mishnah that says if you built a new home or you bought new clothing, you make a Shechianu. Also, if rain falls, you would make a Shechianu. So it doesn't say Hatova Hametiv. So the Gemara answers that it depends. Just like a home, if you built a new home and you have a partner, so you have a partner in the house, so you make Hatova Hametiv. If you have no partner, if you're living alone, you make a Shechianu. The same thing would be with the field. So if you have a partner in the field, you'd make Hatova Hametiv, but if you had no partner in the field, you'd make a Shechianu. My question is, what about the fact that there's partners on planet Earth in that section where it's raining, even if you only own your property, your field independently, but there's somebody who owns another property independently adjacent to your property. You're both getting the same benefit of the rain. Wouldn't that be like two brothers who are inheriting something, even though they're both individually going to have the money in their own bank accounts, but it's coming from one source? So why wouldn't we say the fact that there's a joint joy of anybody who owns? So that's a good question. That's how I thought the Havamina might have thought, and then the Maskana might be that, well, no, it doesn't really work like that. If you have a partner in the actual field, then you make Hatova Hametiv. If not, not. So now, there's much we can understand about the nature of Shechianu. So I'll just touch upon it. What exactly is it that we're celebrating when we make a Shechianu? And just something to think about. Are we celebrating a time that we've reached, or are we celebrating a benefit that we are receiving? So, for example, when the rabbis originally talked about making a bracha on a new fruit, they would make a bracha when they saw new fruit for the first time, even if it was not their new fruit. Meaning, it was connected with the two ways of looking at that. It was either connected to the time. There's a new fruit that's now in season. It's not about them eating the new fruit, it's just about having it. And eventually, the practice became not to say Shechianu on seeing a new fruit, but only on eating a new fruit. So that would mean that when it comes to fruit, we wait till you actually benefit from the fruit rather than when you recognize a time that a new fruit has appeared in the world. But there is another opinion, such as the Shulchan Aruch Harav, the Rabbi Shulchan Aruch, and others who say that no, it's real. When it comes to fruit, the Shechianu isn't on the time; it's on the excitement of a time that brings you benefit. The question then becomes, why would you
make a shechianu on a time of a new fruit when it's not your new fruit that you're going to eat? And the answer is people get enjoyment with anticipation. Like, oh, now is the season of a new fruit. I will be able to get the new fruit whenever I have a chance and I have the money, when I have the time, but they get excited about it as soon as they see it. So there's a certain sense of anticipation that comes only with the visual realization of the new fruit existing. So it could still be some combination of time that brings a person benefit. So that's a little bit about the Shachianu versus Hatov HaMeitiv. And a little bit about the Shachianu as well. We're going to come back to the Shachianu, so I don't want to exhaust everything about Shachianu on number 8. I'll just say this one thing. What about a baby? Do we make today a Shachianu on a girl, a Hatov HaMeitiv on a boy? And the answer is that many people don't make anything. They should. They really should make Hatov HaMeitiv on a boy, and a question of whether or not you should make it on a girl, but you can make a Shachianu on a girl. But we find that people don't know the laws and don't necessarily do that for a variety of reasons. Sometimes I wouldn't just chalk it up to ignorance. There's a anyway, that's one of the issues is that there's some questions about it. Okay, so that's a little bit about 8. Let's go to number 9. Number 9 is the idea that when you drink another type of wine, some specific second type of wine, in a sitting with good company with other people, you make the bracha Hatov HaMeitiv. Okay, so it's all about the company, the type of company you keep that brings you to make Hatov HaMeitiv. So let me read that in the Gemara. Let's say you change wines. Let's say you're having a nice red wine, and then you decide you're going to have a white wine. So you don't have to make a new bracha on the new bottle of wine, but you do of hagafen, but you do make Hatov HaMeitiv. Hatov HaMeitiv, right? Who is good and does good. So it's like a shared experience. So it's become a forgotten art to make Hatov HaMeitiv. It isn't that complicated, but it's become complicated. But I'm going to tell you some of the key things you need to know. One, the second wine should not be any worse than the first wine. Preferably, it should be better than the first wine, unless it's a white wine. Then it doesn't have to be any better than the first wine, because white wine, if the first wine was red, is considered healthier. White is healthier than red. I don't know that that's a fact scientifically in general, but I do know that you get a little bit less of a hangover from white wine. So there's some health element of not affecting your headache and hangover. So it's got to be equal or better or white wine, the second wine. Some people say that you can't have had the second wine out of the table. That's a matter of a disagreement. There are other opinions that say it's okay. There's some people who want it to be like in another room, or as if it like appears somehow magically. That's not necessarily the case. Many of the posting don't agree with that. So it could be there. Maybe if you want to be choshesh, if you want to be concerned for that opinion, you put it a little bit to the side. You keep it in the refrigerator. You can be concerned for that opinion because you don't want to make a brach levatala. It isn't a brach levatala according to other opinions, even if you have the second wine. If, for example, let's say it was closed. So even though it was out already, but it was closed, so you weren't drinking it, your kavanah was to drink the first wine. Okay, so that's the first thing. It has to be a second wine, preferably equal or greater, unless it's white. The second thing is better if it wasn't in front of you when you made the original bracha on the first wine. The third thing is that you can't be drinking alone. You have to be drinking with other people. How many people? At least 2. Obviously, the more the merrier. So it's a beautiful idea that you only get to make this Hatov HaMeitiv when you're when you're generally like, the variety is what gives the blessing. In other words, there could be wine. Wine is good. You say, okay, what's wrong with just having one wine? One wine is good, but two wines are even better. And that's and drinking on your own, okay, but to drink together is even better. So you're making hatov ha'metiv because it's exponentially increased the joy of having a l'chaim when you're not just making your own l'chaim. It's almost a weird thing. You don't even make a l'chaim to yourself. You make a l'chaim because you're wishing a bracha, you're wishing a blessing for life and happiness for somebody else. So that perfectly makes sense. Okay, we've already talked a number of details about hatov ha'metiv on wine. And I'll refer you back to an earlier daf. You can look up the many other details there as well. So that's number 9. Number 10 is when to make a shechianu on purchasing items. Well, when to make it. Many people actually think that you make the shechianu when you put on the item for the first time. So let's say you purchase a new suit, you should wait till you put it on and then you can make shechianu. In truth, you can make the shechianu as soon as you purchase it. There's a question of whether you should wait till it's tailored. You know, if you're getting it hemmed in and the waistline taken in or taken out, you can wait till that's all done. The truth is, if you didn't make the shechianu when you purchased it and took it home, you still can make the shechianu when you try it on for the first time. So that's when you make the shechianu. Then there's a whole other question about what you make the shechianu on. So let's take a look at the Gemara. The Gemara says the following. Amar Rav Huna, this is the end of 59b. When do you make the shechianu? When, let's say you got clothing, let's say you inherited clothing, and you don't have any of this type of clothing. But if you have this type of clothes, if you have the same jacket, you don't have to make a shechianu. Rabbi Yochanan says, even if you have that same type of clothes, he already inherited that clothes. Now he got a second a jacket of the same brand. He still has to make a shechianu on the second brand. Okay, so that's a little bit about the shechianu, and we'll continue. Though there's a lot more to say on shechianu on daf, top of daf 60. Thank you.